morning, everyone. That's nice and loud. All right. I'm Colin Mathis. I'm the gallery director here at Parkside. So thank you all for coming. And today we're going to hear from Chloe Hanken, who's our current artist in residence here at Parkside. And she's an artist in residence in printmaking. And she's also been spending quite a bit of time in the ceramic studio as well. For Lisa Marie, yeah. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to Chloe's talk today, especially after getting to spend a lot of time with her work installing the show and taking a look at that. So I highly recommend that after the talk or before it comes down that you stop in at the Foundation Gallery, which is kind of on the other side of this building, down the long hallway by printmaking and painting. So check that out. And yeah, she's made quite an extensive, impressive body of work while she's here. And if I'm not mistaken, I think all the work but one piece is from working while at Parkside. And Chloe's usually based in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and received her MFA in Art Studio from the University of New Mexico and her BA in Human Ecology from the College of the Atlantic, which I learned is in Maine. Yes? Okay. And she's had work exhibited nationally across the US and was most recently the 2024-25 Emerging Artist with Strata Gallery in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I'd also like to thank the Osborne and Skekik Family Foundation. Their generous support has made our Artist in Residence program possible, and it's really part of the reason why Chloe's here with us today. So please welcome Chloe Hanken.
Thank you, Colin, for the introduction, and thank you all for being here this morning. Before I get started, I wanted to thank the Osborne and Skekik Foundation for supporting this residency. This has been an incredible gift of time. I also wanted to thank all of the faculty, staff, and students who've made this residency possible. Thank you for sharing your expertise, resources, and making me feel like part of the community. And finally, I wanted to thank my partner, Elijah, who is my constant collaborator from afar. Thank you for taking care of our life at home and making it possible for me to be here. So I wouldn't call myself a superstitious person, but the unexpected happenings that grow into superstition is something that really excites me. In the days leading up to my departure for this residency and during my journey here from New Mexico, I was presented with a number of inauspicious symbols and inauspicious happenings that gave me pause. First, while packing my bags, a bottle of perfume was knocked off a shelf over my sketchbook. Pulling it from the mess and opening the pages, I watched in horror as all of the writing and preparation I had done for this residency drip off the page into a puddle of ink. Second, after an incredibly dry season in New Mexico, a year where the Rio Grande went dry for the second time in 50 years, the first being only 2 years ago, we were met on our drive to Wisconsin with thunderstorms, torrential rains across northern New Mexico, Colorado, and through Kansas. And third, while passing through eastern Colorado, we entered the Comanche National Grasslands. We were driving towards our campsite and nearing dusk when we started noticing small shapes in our path. We couldn't believe it at first, but lumbering across the road were dozens of tarantulas. This was completely unexpected, and we later learned that we had decided to stop in a town celebrated for its tarantula sightings and conveniently drove through during the peak of breeding season. All of the family members that I've told about this have laughed, knowing how fearful I am of spiders. So it was shocking, but there was also an expected beauty in the chance of it all. All this to be said that when I arrived, I felt like I needed a tarot card reading or to buy a lottery ticket or one of the many things that you do when you're on the cusp of something and holding this frenetic energy. As an artist, this is also an exciting moment to suddenly assemble a new set of symbols to work with. especially before an intensive time of making. The show at the Foundation Gallery, ever so far from here, is a new body of work produced at Parkside during the last 2 months of working in the printmaking and ceramic studios on campus. The work investigates journeys and how superstition and magical thinking shape our understanding of entering the unknown. Through prints that layer illustration with archival materials and ceramic sculptures created as objects of protection, I explore stories of catastrophe, family narrative, and the locus where history and imagined spaces converge. Additionally, I've been reading Emily Wilson's translation of the Odyssey, which has given me rich symbols and themes to draw upon: journeys, strangers, hospitality, and misfortune. I'm particularly interested in the ways that prophecy, oracles, and systems of divination offer a framework for meaning-making during times when futures feel out of reach, and how our desire to seek protection extends beyond the physical into the unseen. In landscapes marked by transformation, the work traces the intersection of past and future, body and place, myth and self. I'll return to some of these pieces specifically later in this talk. I was born and raised in Oregon, and from a pretty young age, I expected to become a scientist. I had always been interested in the natural world and spent time working in wetlands and in various restoration projects. When it came time to go to college, I decided to study at College of the Atlantic in Bar Harbor, Maine. This college is unique for a number of reasons, but what drew me to its programs was their single major, human ecology. Human ecology, rather than a department or specific discipline, is seen at the college as an educational pedagogy. The belief that all learning is inherently interdisciplinary and guided by the individual experience of each student. In my specific trajectory, human ecology was an exploration into wildlife ecology, natural history, and illustration. One of my mentors, John Anderson, taught history through storytelling and encouraged studies that were based in deep observation, looking for patterns, behaviors, and the ways in which stories, people's stories and perspectives come to bear upon history, narrative, and landscape. This is an image of Great Duck Island, where I spent time doing research as a student, and this became kind of the center point for much of my education. While I was on the island, I was making a population estimate of Leach's storm petrels. They burrow with their little feet underground, so you need game cameras to spy on them or reach underground to find them. I spent much of my time writing, documenting my observations of the island that could never be part of a data set. Developing an education in seeing this web made it challenging then to divorce myself from these connections and move forward as a data-driven scientist. Art, in my mind, offered an alternative, a way to use unknowing and a variety of knowledge sources as a scaffolding for these associations, and eventually to use the frame of a print to underscore connections between disparate themes and ideas. I took a printmaking course during my third year of college and was really taken by the technical aspects of the process. It was drawing with an added layer of inquiry that satisfied the researcher in me. I continued making art throughout my undergraduate degree and later produced a body of work entitled Born into the Summerland. This work was built from interviews I conducted with family members as inspiration for a collection of prints and accompanying prose. With this portfolio, I applied to graduate school and was accepted to the University of New Mexico, where I began my MFA in printmaking and began digging deeper into an art practice. Much of the work that I was making in graduate school emerged from playing with layers of family narrative. Thematically, something that I'm regularly coming back to in my work is superstition, chance happenings, and the abyss of human interpretation that lies between them. This piece, entitled When Told Family Curse, was one of the first lithographs that I produced and was collaboratively printed with master printer Julia Marcos, who was at the time studying at the Tamarind Institute. This print grew from a family story told to me by my grandmother about a curse that had befallen her father's family, the Wentholds. The Wenthold family curse led to the deaths of 3 relatives: a mother burned alive, a son gored by a bull, and a cousin struck by lightning in a field. In the realm of family stories, this felt like largely an outlier to tales of choring and child rearing. The Wentholds had given us a slim nose and a strong sensibility for rules and reason. The print Wenthold Family Curse is a meditation on these inherited stories and the tensions that exist in their retelling. Compositionally, this print is separated into different segments, different worlds. The first and most prominent element of the print is the bull puppet impaling the man through his middle. Below the scene of the goring band is an underworld, illustrating the narrative of the Wenthold family curse and my understanding of the passage of time. Fate and chance circle each other in the work. Fate takes form in puppet strings, an orchestrated moment pulled and acted out. Chance exists in the materiality of the image. The print began with a wash, loosely painted over stone. As the material dried, chance reticulation emerged, creating both the form of the bull and the shape of the narrative band. As the chronicler of this family myth, I worked back into the areas of reticulation, incising the stone to examine elements of the story in my own hand. Fate and chance in my mind are the parallels to the tension between superstition and rationality at play in the story, pointing to larger cultural differences I experience with family members. This is another piece made during that time and is representative of the kind of work I was making during graduate school. This print, entitled Zoom Funeral, I decided to include in the show at the Foundation Gallery, so you'll be able to see this in person. There was a recommendation by a print historian who visited my studio to spend some time with Rembrandt's etchings. I picked up the book Rembrandt's Life of Christ and became interested in the painting Woman Taken in Adultery. What moved me about this painting was not the subject or the figures, but the imposing body of the architecture around them. Having thought a lot about buildings and interiority, especially after the pandemic, I wanted to create a kind of monument that captured this period of time and the way that it continued to haunt me. Zoom Funeral is a 4-run lithograph that was collaboratively printed at the Tamarind Institute by Emery Spina. In many ways, this was a response to the profoundly 21st century experience of taking part in my grandmother's funeral as a live stream. I, like many people, was making connections between the Black Plague and what was going on during the pandemic. I was thinking, too, about the parallels between illumination of stained glass and the illumination that we see on computers and cell phones. What is the architecture of this moment? There's no direct key or legend to go through all of the images that I was making in this print, but I will direct you to the stack of chairs in the left-hand corner. I've gotten a lot of questions about the chairs since I've made this piece. I'm referencing a drawing called Men Shoveling Chairs that I encountered in a catalog for an exhibition on medieval art. The scholarship around this image cites a Flemish popular saying about piled stools and chairs indicating social disorder. The shoveling away of this accumulation has been interpreted as the idea of achieving social equality by the peasantry and disrupting feudal order. In my image, Zoom Funeral, however, the situation is reversed. Rather than the spreading of resources and social equality, I was instead thinking about the vast accumulations of wealth that happened during this period and the deep social unrest. What we were left with was a precarious stack of chairs that we are still contributing to this day. Materially, much like When Told Family Curse, I was using painted washes that acted as a kind of scaffolding for the rest of the image. At this moment, I also started bringing in archival and collaged imagery to build out the windows and complement the drawn components of the image. This way of layering has become central to the way that I construct my images. Here are a couple of lithographs that I made around this time. This one is called Bend Through the Desert. And this one is called Man-Eater. And then this one is The Turf is Not the Territory. Much of the work I produce are prints, especially lithographs, monotypes, etchings, and screen prints. Playing on the screen are a few videos documenting what I've been working on here in the printmaking studio. In the video on the left, I am mixing inks, rolling out an ink slab. In the video on the right, I'm setting up the press, inking my plate, and pulling a print. There are lots of rules and rituals in printmaking. It's labor-intensive, infuriating, exhilarating, and I could spend hours talking about the technical parts of this process. But in many ways, I see printmaking as the last step of my process. More accurately, this is what you're likely to see in my studio. Piles of cut-up transparencies, paint, scanning, tracing. Most of my time is dedicated to image generating and collecting. I look for old photographs, objects or natural materials with exciting textures. I also weave and collect old textiles. The work made in my studio is reflexive. Sculptural objects become background textures for prints, and drawn forms become blueprints for sculptures. The repetition of textures or motifs creates this visual archive that I'm working with. What printmaking offers is a kind of continuity. So even though there's a wide variety of sources, in ink, they come together in a synchronous way. This piece, No Longer Not Yet, is currently on display here at the Mathis Gallery, in case you would like to see it in person. When I start a new piece, I often start with a wash. Sometimes I use ink, but in this video, I'm using a toner slurry. I make these bold gestures, and then I pick up the mylar, which is the plastic sheet that the toner is sitting on, allowing the material to kind of drip and pool together. As it dries, it settles into these amazing fractal patterns and shapes. And then I use this as the scaffolding for the rest of the image. Then I'll go back in with acrylic paint, collaged pieces, building up and scratching away to find the finished image. I often find myself working on the floor, outside, or uneven surfaces where I tend to pick up unexpected textures. This is an image from one of my favorite artists, Nathan Oliveira. In an interview describing his process, he spoke about working in abstraction until it suggests figuration. I found this explanation of process resonant to my way of working, and often artists that I'm most drawn to straddle this way of playing between worlds of figuration and abstraction. During graduate school, I had access to a wonderful collection of lithographs through the Tamarind Institute, and often came back to artists like Jose Luis Cuevas, Rufino Tamayo, which opened up an interest in painters and printmakers like Francisco Toledo, who are working with the figure, daily life, and myth. There's another of Rufino Tamayo. I'm also inspired by the works of Margot Humphrey, Warrington Colescott, who taught at UW-Madison for nearly 40 years, whose use of these dense narrative scenes with often humorous imagery point to gray areas and nuance in storytelling. I think, too, about the etchings of David Hockney, especially in his works interpreting fairy tales, pulling figures from his life and blending them with sometimes religious themes. Returning now to the work that I've been making here at Parkside, it's all incredibly fresh. So I don't have all the language to speak about it succinctly, but here are some of the ideas that I've been thinking about and how research, material process, and printing all coalesce. From the beginning in my work in printmaking, I've always been interested in the material qualities of the matrix. The matrix being wood for relief, copper for intaglio, aluminum plates or stone in lithography. There's so much time spent with the matrix, and yet it's invisible to anyone but the printer. However, there are always hints of it. An embossed edge, a spot in an image indicating a fossil in the limestone, the use of wood grain in an image. My venturing into sculpture grew out of this fascination with the matrix. I initially started working in plaster, making reliefs. I would take these clay slabs and push textures into the surface and draw into them. And then I would create a form and pour around them to create this cast. When I pulled my first cast, I experienced a feeling similar to the exhilaration of pulling a print. The plaster tablets were a reaching out to the materiality of printmaking beyond paper. The treatment of the surface of the tablets was an attempt to recreate a patina or quality of oxidation that I sometimes encounter on metal plates, leaning into ideas of time. I've always been inspired by the bronze works of Kiki Smith and Heidi Bauscher's silicone skinnings of building interiors. The surfaces of these objects, with their sparkle of mica or transitions from blues to greens, have a dreamlike quality, almost as if the objects could be from a different world or pulled from a memory. These sculptural objects that I've been making have also become a part of my 2D image archive, where I scan them and utilize them in a photopositive process. In this print, Bag of Winds, the highlighted area in the corner, originated from this surface. This semester, as an extension of my more sculptural practice, I had the opportunity to work in the ceramics studio. This has been such an incredible way of playing, making mistakes, and translating some of the motifs that I've been often working with on paper into the physical. I've also been thinking about the art department's theme of creative risk. And for me, risk-taking often involves incorporating a new material into my practice. They were created similar to my 2D pieces, originating with the wash. But instead of collaging, I began building the ceramics on top, using the washes as a guide. The ceramics themselves are fairly abstract, but have a kind of bodily sense to them. Torsos and limbs. Some of them take on more angelic qualities. Others feature figures like spiders, trees, and root systems. As I was making these pieces, I was thinking about the late medieval tradition of pilgrim badges. Across cultures, people have ways of marking those who are participating in pilgrimages or engaging with sacred sites. In Europe, during this period, Catholics who traveled to sacred sites often adorned themselves with lead badges of saints, martyrs, auspicious animals, and metonymical symbols that offered protection to the wearers. And they were also souvenirs. I first encountered these badges because of my interest in beachcombing and a brief obsession with watching videos of mudlarking in the United Kingdom. Many examples of pilgrim badges were found in rivers around Europe, discarded or lost by the wearers. The badges were then found hundreds of years later, eroded, often fragmented objects of ritual by those picking through the mud. The scholarship around these badges is fascinating, giving insight into the imagery of medieval Europe, haunted by pagan symbologies that are being actively consumed into Catholicism and yet resisting erasure. Badges worn often included the profane, sexual, monsters, and in many ways at odds with the teaching of the Church. In her book, Averting Demons, Ruth Mellenkopf writes that the presence of these symbols in altars, architectures, and in badges were not intended to be consumed by a lay person or clergy, but was intended to directly interface with the millions of demons said to be present in daily life, to negotiate with the unseen world. The world of the unseen, I think, parallels our digital lives today. The secular demons of interruptions, work, want, alienation, economies of attention, the motives of unregulated business interests around us. Making objects for me is a practice of staying connected to the analog. How do I resist being completely consumed by the virtual world whose walls are closing in around my daily experiences? Making objects is what pushes me to journey forward, to be uncomfortable in my art practice, enough to make something unexpected. In many ways, these objects of protection keep my hands busy, enough to pull me back to the land of the living. In moving through the works on paper, this is what I've been thinking about in no particular order. 1, Dry River. If Odysseus was journeying through New Mexico, if by river rather than by sea, his travels would have been interrupted by the parched riverbed of the Rio Grande. His crew seeking treasure and opening the bag of unfavorable winds would have cast fallout north, south, and east. Sirens in cottonwood trees sing sweet nothings of water diversion to Texas, to data centers, to fields of alfalfa. 2, On Strangers and Returning Home. It's funny to visit a place that in many ways is supposed to be familiar. Places where your relatives live, where your parents grew up, where your grandparents are buried. I've found in my many trips to the Midwest that it never quite feels like a homecoming, but instead a place further and further from my imagination. I often use newspaper articles and photos as stand-ins for my own memory and connection. Collaging, creating composites with features of kinship, but upon completion, the figures are ultimately strange and unfamiliar. My own journey to the underworld. The ghost of my companion Elpenor came towards me. My Lord, remember me, I beg you. Remember, remember, remember. 3, Haunting and Technology. If technology is engaging with the world of the unseen, it could also be interpreted as interfacing with the world of the dead. Ancient minerals, fossils, and bones drive our technologies forward. In this haunting, we can experience time and place all at once, sitting indoors, unmoving. Technology, while both driving us forward, also forces us to constantly engage with the materials of nostalgia, which for many stops us in our tracks. And finally, 4, Driving West, Apocalypse. I find myself often thinking about the tensions of living and traveling through landscapes where themes of collapse are omnipresent. Droughts, fires, and in New Mexico specifically, the testing ground for the atomic bomb and future weapons of war. When we talk about apocalypse, there is a kind of indulgence, a removal of responsibility as if nothing came before and nothing comes after. In places that have experienced the end of the world over and over again, I keep coming back to Franny Choi's poem, "The world keeps ending and the world goes on." These are the final stanzas of the poem. I was born from an apocalypse, and I've come to tell you what I know, which is that the apocalypse began when Columbus praised God and lowered his anchor. It began when a continent was drawn into cutlets. It began when Kubla Khan told Marco, "Begin at the beginning." At the time the apocalypse began, the world had already ended. It ended every day for a century, and the world spun in its place. It ended, and we woke up and ordered Greek coffees, drew the hot liquid through our teeth, as everywhere the apocalypse rumbled. The apocalypse remembered our dear, beloved apocalypse. It drifted slowly from the trees all around us, so loud that we stopped hearing it. With that, I will open up the floor to questions if anyone has any. Thank you so much for coming to this talk. And the show is open until November 23rd if any of you want to stop through. I'll use Sumi ink. Usually something that's archival. I think a bowl is one of them. I think across art history, people are making bowls over and over again.